Boar huddled by the flickering ember of a dying fire and wondered how anyone could survive when the wind howled at -40 degrees. The answer does not lie in high-tech jackets, but in a suite of ingenious strategies honed over tens of thousands of years. Strategies that we can read in the bones, teeth, and hearthstones left behind by our Ice Age ancestors. First, the very layout of their shelters acted like a natural thermostat. In the Upper Paleolithic, people carved shallow depressions in the ground and lined them with layers of animal hides, bark, and spruce boughs. These skin tents trapped a thin layer of warm air, much like the insulating pockets of a modern sleeping bag. In colder regions, they dug semi-subterranean pit houses, sometimes 2 meters deep, and covered the entrance with a low-profile doorway of packed earth and stone. The earth itself stored heat from the daytime sun and released it slowly through the night, keeping the interior a few degrees above the brutal outside temperature. Second, fire was the centerpiece of warmth. Archaeologists have found repeatedly burned hearths in sites such as Les Cateys in France, where charcoal layers indicate that fires were kept burning for many hours, sometimes even through the night. To keep the flames alive, Ice Age people stored dry tinder, inner bark, fungus, or powdered birch sap inside hollowed-out antler tubes or stone-capped pits, protecting it from moisture. They also used a clever fire-tending technique. Small portable embers were wrapped in animal fat and placed in woven grass baskets, allowing a quick restart of a larger fire without having to gather new fuel from the frozen ground. Third, clothing was a masterpiece of natural engineering. Cave paintings and preserved fur fragments show that hunters stitched together multi-layered garments from reindeer, elk, and bison hides. The outer layer was often scraped to a leather-like finish, shedding water and wind, while the inner layer remained soft and insulated. Bone needles and sinew thread, discovered at sites such as Dolny Vestonis, allowed them to sew tight seams, reducing drafts. In especially frigid periods, they added a fur coat of pelts draped over the shoulders and wrapped around the torso, essentially creating a living blanket. Fourth, body heat was conserved through social behavior. Evidence from hearth circles suggests that groups slept shoulder to shoulder, sharing the warmth of each other's metabolic heat. Even the arrangement of sleeping platforms, raised on stone slabs or wooden frames, kept bodies away from the cold ground, while a layer of dried moss or grass provided an extra insulating cushion. All these methods, strategic shelter design, relentless fire management, layered hide clothing, and cooperative sleeping, combined to turn -40 degrees from a death sentence into a survivable challenge. Scientists believe that without this complex toolkit, early modern humans would never have expanded into the harshest latitudes of the Pleistocene world. How did a hunter-gatherer manage to stay alive when the wind ripped at his skin and the temperature plunged to -40 degrees? The answer isn't a miracle coat made of synthetics. It's a fur-lined hide, painstakingly crafted by hands that knew every fiber of the animal they had just taken down. First, the raw material. Large mammals such as woolly mammoth, bison, reindeer, and even the occasional cave bear provided the thickest pelts. Archaeologists have found thousands of perforated bone needles and tiny stone, all in sites ranging from the Altai Mountains to the Great Plains, proof that Upper Paleolithic peoples were already mastering needlework. The process began with skinning the animal as soon as possible after the kill to keep the hide supple. Hunters would carefully scrape away flesh and hair, then stretch the skin over a frame and let it dry in the sun or near a fire, a step that both hardened the hide and reduced bacterial growth. Next came the insulation. The inner side of the hide, still soft and fibrous, was left with its natural fur attached, or in some cases hunters pulled the fur from the animal's back and layered it between 2 sheets of hide, creating a primitive but effective double glove. Experimental archaeology shows that a single layer of mammoth fur can retain up to 80% of body heat, and when sandwiched between hides, the effect is comparable to a modern down jacket. Stitching was a delicate affair. Using sinew or plant fibers, early seamstresses looped tiny stitches along the edges, overlapping the fur so it did not shift. The tiny perforations on bone needles, often only a few millimeters wide, allowed the weaver to pull thread through without tearing the delicate fur. Some finds even include tiny beads made of polished stone, likely used as decorative closures or to tighten cuffs, preventing cold air from slipping in at the wrists and ankles. Maintenance mattered too. Evidence of repeated wear patterns on hides from sites such as Dolny Vestonis suggests that these garments were repaired season after season. When a seam split, the hunter would reneedle it, sometimes adding extra layers of fur where the cold was most biting. In the harshest winters, people also coated themselves in multiple layers: a base layer of tightly woven plant fibers, a middle fur-lined hide, and an outer shell of rawhide treated with animal fat to become water-resistant. These garments were not just about warmth, they were a social signal. Buried with a few of the best preserved fur coats are ornamental beads and pigments, indicating that the wearer's status could be read at a glance. In many groups, the knowledge of hide preparation was passed down through generations, often with elder women teaching younger girls the exact tension needed for a stitch that would not snap when the wind howled. So when you picture a lone figure trudging through an icy tundra, imagine not a shaggy, unrefined sack, but a carefully constructed fur-lined ensemble. Each stitch a tiny triumph over the elements, each repaired seam a story of survival. This is the secret of the first insulated clothing: a marriage of anatomy, chemistry, and sheer ingenuity that kept our ancestors warm enough to hunt, to raise children, and ultimately to keep the human story moving forward. How did our Ice Age ancestors keep their feet from turning into icicles when the wind howled at -30 degrees? The answer is not a high-tech thermal sock, but a clever mix of anatomy, clothing, firecraft, and communal habits that turn the very ground beneath them into a kind of natural heated floor. First, the body itself gave them a head start. Neanderthals and early modern humans both had a higher proportion of subcutaneous fat on their lower limbs than today's people, a trait that acts like built-in insulation. Skeletal studies show they also had a slightly broader pelvis and a more robust tibia, suggesting they spent a lot of time standing or walking on uneven, icy terrain, which forced the muscles to generate extra heat. That internal warmth was only half the battle. The next layer was clothing made from animal hides. Archaeologists have recovered split fur pelts at sites such as Dolny Vestonis, where the skin was scraped, stretched, and sewn into simple foot wraps. The fur side faced inward, trapping a thin layer of air that acted like a natural down jacket for the foot. In colder periods, people lined those wraps with the inner fur of reindeer or Arctic hare, which is exceptionally fine and retains heat even when damp. But the real secret weapon was the fire foot technique. When a camp made a fire pit, they dug a shallow trench, lined it with stones, and then laid a layer of dry moss or bark on top. After the fire burned down to glowing embers, they placed their foot wraps on the warm surface for a few minutes, allowing the hides to absorb residual heat. This pre-warming step could raise the temperature of the fur by several degrees, enough to keep toes from numbing during the night. Speaking of night, the way they slept was a game changer. In many Upper Paleolithic sites, archaeologists have found evidence of sleeping platforms, raised stone slabs or wooden frames built a foot or two above the ground. By sleeping off the cold, damp earth, the feet stayed drier. Often a communal fire burned nearby, and the group would cluster together, sharing body heat. The heat radiated from the fire, and the bodies created a microclimate, and people tucked their foot wraps under their thighs, where warm blood flow helped keep the wraps from cooling too quickly. When fire was not an option, during a sudden blizzard or while on a long hunt, they turned to a portable solution: the snowshoe-style foot. Large, flat pieces of bark or split wood were bound to the soles with plant fibers, increasing surface area and distributing weight so the foot did not sink into the snow. This reduced direct contact with the icy ground, lessening conductive heat loss. In some cases, a thin layer of animal fat was spread on the bark before binding, creating a waterproof barrier that prevented snow from soaking the hide. Even the choice of footwear was strategic. In the Altai Mountains, researchers found wear patterns on stone tools that matched the shape of a primitive boot sole: a thick, rounded heel that lifted the foot off the ground while walking, much like modern hiking boots. This raised sole design minimized the amount of cold from the ground that could travel up the leg. Finally, communal knowledge passed down from elder hunters ensured that the right materials were selected each season. Elders remembered which animal skins held heat best, how long to cure them, and the exact sequence of drying and oiling to make them water repellent. That cultural memory, etched into bone and stone, kept generations from losing a foot to frostbite. So while they did not have thermal socks, Ice Age people combined natural insulation, clever hide processing, pre-warming fire techniques, raised sleeping platforms, and smart footwear design to keep their feet warm enough to keep moving, hunting, and, most importantly, surviving the relentless cold. How could a hunter-gatherer survive a night when the thermometer dropped to -40 degrees without a single synthetic fiber in his wardrobe? The answer lies in a clever system of layering that ancient humans perfected long before anyone ever heard the word thermal underwear. First, they harvested the warmest skins they could find: bison, mammoth, reindeer, or woolly rhinoceros. The inner layer was a thin, almost translucent membrane of fur still attached to the animal's hide. Because the fur fibers point outward, they trap a thin layer of air next to the skin, acting like a natural blanket. Archaeologists have found evidence of this skin on skin contact in dozens of Upper Paleolithic sites, where cut marks on bones match the shape of the original animal's pelt. On top of that, they added a second, sturdier shell made from woven plant fibers or tightly bound strips of hide. Experiments by experimental archaeologists show that a woven bark or nettle fabric, when soaked in animal fat and then dried, becomes water-resistant and surprisingly wind-proof. This middle layer blocks the relentless gusts that strip heat from even the best fur. The outermost coat was the real armor against the cold. Thick double-stitched hide panels were sewn together with sinew, then reinforced with a fringe of long hair along the edges. The fringe acts like a brush, catching stray wind and preventing it from sliding under the seams. Some sites even reveal a thin layer of ash or powdered charcoal tucked between the outer hide and the middle layer, an early form of insulation that absorbs moisture and reduces heat loss. Finally, they did not forget the extremities. Hands and feet were wrapped in multiple layers of fur mittens and boot liners, often tied together with leather cords. The soles of the boots were lined with bark or moss, then covered with a thick hide sole, creating a sandwich that keeps the foot warm while still allowing enough flexibility to move over ice. All of these layers work together like a living thermostat, each one contributing to a cumulative value that could keep core temperature steady even when the air was screaming -40 degrees. The secret was not luxury, but ingenuity, observation, and relentless trial and error that turned every available natural material into a piece of the ultimate cold weather suit. How did our Ice Age ancestors turn a raw animal hide into a waterproof, wind-proof coat that could keep them alive on a freezing night? The answer lies in a gritty, smoky kitchen that looks more like a primitive laboratory than a campsite. Scientists studying butchered mammoth hides at sites such as Dolny Vestonis and the Siberian Yana River have uncovered traces of burned bone, charcoal, and mineral residues that point to a well-organized tanning process powered by fire. First, the hunters would strip the hide as soon as possible after the kill, because the longer the skin stayed on the carcass, the more bacteria would break down the collagen fibers. They then scraped away any remaining flesh and fat with stone scrapers, a step that not only cleaned the hide, but also opened the pores, making the next stage more effective. At this point, the hide is still soft and highly perishable, so the group would set up a low-heat fire, often a pit lined with stones that could hold a steady temperature of 50 to 70 degrees Celsius for hours. The hide was then laid over the warm stones, sometimes interleaved with layers of grass or bark. The gentle heat caused the proteins in the hide to denature and rearrange, tightening the fibers and making the material less prone to rot. The real magic came from the smoke. As the fire smoldered, it produced a thick cloud of aromatic compounds, phenols, aldehydes, and fatty acids that settled into the pores of the skin. These chemicals act as natural preservatives, repelling water and insects. Archaeological residues of pine resin and birch bark, both high in tannins, have been found embedded in ancient hides, suggesting that prehistoric tanners deliberately added plant material to the fire to boost the smoky infusion. After several hours of smoking, the hide was removed and stretched on a frame made of antler or wood. While still warm, workers beat it with wooden mallets, a technique that further compacts the fibers and creates a smooth, glossy surface. Finally, the dried leather was often rubbed with animal fat or oil, seal, wolf, or even mammoth, creating an additional waterproof layer that could shed snow and rain. Experimental archaeology has shown that such a finish can reduce water penetration by up to 80%, a crucial advantage when the temperature drops to -30 degrees and the wind bites. The whole operation required coordination. Someone tended the fire, another scraped and stretched the hide, and elders oversaw the process, passing down the exact timing and plant recipes. This communal effort turned a raw, smelly slab of skin into a durable, insulated garment that could be wrapped around a sleeping individual in a cave or used as a tarp over a shelter. In short, fire-powered tanning was not just a craft. It was a lifeline, a technology that let Ice Age people stay dry, warm, and ready for the next hunt. How did Ice Age people stay warm while they trekked across tundra, crossed frozen rivers, or chased a herd of mammoth? The answer is not that they simply shrugged it off. It is a toolbox of portable heat that looks surprisingly modern. Archaeologists have found stone-heated packs and hot stone blankets in sites ranging from the Yana River Valley in Siberia to the Magdalenian caves of France. And experimental reconstructions show they could keep a small group of hunters alive for hours in sub-zero weather. The basic principle is simple. Heat a dense stone in a fire, then wrap it in organic material that retains warmth but protects the skin. Flint or quartzite pieces about the size of a fist were placed in a hearth until they glowed orange, often for 30 to 45 minutes. When the fire burned low, the stone was lifted with a forked stick and quickly wrapped in layers of dried grass, bark, or animal hide. The resulting hot stone pack could be tucked under a sleeping mat, slung over the shoulder, or placed against the back of a crouching hunter while he stalked a caribou herd. In colder climates, groups sometimes carried a set of preheated stones in a leather pouch, swapping the warm ones for cooler ones as needed. The leather acted as an insulator, slowing heat loss so the stones stayed above freezing for up to 3 hours. When a stone cooled, a fresh one was taken from the fire. This rotation system allowed the tribe to maintain a steady portable furnace without having to build a new fire every night, crucial when wood was scarce or a sudden blizzard forced them to move quickly. Hot stone blankets are a related trick. A large flat stone, often a smooth river pebble or a slab of basalt, was heated, then placed on a woven mat of reeds or animal hair. A family would lie on top, the stone's radiant heat warming the air trapped in the fabric. Because the stone's surface stayed hot for a long time, the blanket could keep a sleeping pit warm long after the fire was out, reducing the risk of hypothermia while occupants rested in a shallow depression dug into the snow. Science backs this up. Thermal imaging of experimental hot stone packs shows surface temperatures staying near 45 degrees Celsius for the first hour, dropping to a survivable 20 degrees after 3 hours, enough to keep core body temperature stable when the ambient air is minus 20 degrees or lower. Moreover, the use of animal fat or plant oils on the stone's surface reduced thermal shock, preventing cracks and extending the stone's usable life. These portable heating methods also had social implications. The person tasked with tending the fire and rotating stones often held a respected position within the group. As a skilled heatkeeper, could mean the difference between a successful hunt and a night lost to frostbite. In many sites, we see wear patterns on hands and forearms that suggest repeated handling of hot objects, indicating that this was a routine part of daily life, not a one-off emergency. So the next time you think of Ice Age survival as a grim battle against the cold, picture a small team of hunters huddled under a hot stone blanket, a glowing stone tucked into their pelts, and a firekeeper shuffling warm rocks from the blaze to the sleeping pit. It was not magic. It was clever use of stone, fire, and animal skins. Portable warmth that let our ancestors wander the frozen world without turning into ice statues. How could a Paleolithic family keep going when the wind turned into a knife, and the snow piled up as high as a modern 2-story house? The answer lies in a series of clever on-the-spot fixes that turned a broken spear or a torn hide into a lifesaver, and in the emergency cloaks that could be thrown together from whatever was at hand. First, let us talk about gear that broke. Bone points snapped, wooden shafts splintered, and leather straps frayed long before night fell. The hunter did not have a toolbox, but he did have a portable workshop built into his own body. A sharp flint, often kept in a small leather pouch tied to the belt, could be used to shave a fresh edge on a broken bone tip, creating a new point in minutes. If a wooden shaft snapped, the hunter would strip bark from a fresh sapling, whittle it down with a stone adze, and wedge the new piece into the broken end, using a bit of rawhide soaked in water to make it pliable. As the hide dried, it contracted, binding the joint tightly, an ancient version of a modern glue laminate. When it came to clothing, the Ice Age people were masters of improvisation. A sudden storm could rip a fur coat or tear a woven plant mat. Rather than panic, the group would harvest the nearest animal hide, often a fresh kill or a shed skin, and while still damp, lay it flat on a warm stone fire. The heat made the hide supple, allowing them to stretch it over a simple frame made from bent antlers or flexible branches. Once it cooled, the hide hardened into a waterproof emergency cloak that could be slipped over the shoulders in seconds. For smaller tiers, they used the inner membrane of fish or the soft underfur of small mammals, stitching the pieces together with sinew that had been split and twisted into a strong thread. The same sinew, when soaked, became an excellent binding material for repairing broken halves or reinforcing a cracked stone axe head. Even the most basic shelter benefited from these quick fixes. A partially collapsed pit house could be shored up with packed snow bricks held in place by bundles of dried grasses tied together with plant fibers. When a roof leak appeared, occupants would melt a small amount of snow, pour the water over a patch of bark, and let it freeze, creating a solid waterproof seal. This snow cement lasted through the night, buying precious time until a more permanent repair could be made. All of these tricks were passed down orally and reinforced through daily practice. Elders demonstrated the art of reshaping a bone point, while teenagers learned to pull sinew from a fresh carcass and twist it into rope. In the bitter cold, every second counted, and the ability to improvise a new spear tip or a makeshift cloak meant the difference between a successful winter hunt and a night spent shivering beneath a leaky shelter. The Ice Age may have been brutal, but its people were resourceful engineers, turning broken bits of nature into survival gear faster than a single word can describe frostbite. How did a hunter-gatherer survive a night in a wind-blasted cavern when the temperature outside was dropping to -40 degrees Celsius? The answer is not a high-tech down jacket or a synthetic membrane. It is a set of insulation tricks honed over tens of thousands of years, many of which still whisper their wisdom into the design of modern outdoor gear. First, Ice Age peoples knew the power of layered insulation. In the archaeological record, we find evidence of animal skins wrapped around the torso, a second layer of furs draped over the shoulders, and a third, lighter layer of plant fibers tucked under the limbs. This sandwich approach creates air pockets that trap body heat while still allowing moisture to escape. Contemporary designers mimic this with multi-layer systems, a moisture-wicking base, an insulating mid-layer, and a breathable shell. The key difference is that ancient humans did not rely on airtight fabrics. They embraced natural ventilation, letting sweat evaporate through the fur's loft rather than sealing it in. Second, the Ice Age wardrobe was all about strategic placement of the warmest materials where the body loses heat fastest. The neck, head, hands, and feet received the thickest pelts, while the torso got a slightly thinner skin. Modern gear follows the same principle, using reinforced insulation in the cold spots, a fleece-lined hood, gauntlet cuffs, and insulated boots. Even the cut of a parka often mirrors the ancient fur coat's taper, narrowing at the waist to keep the core warm and prevent cold air from pooling in the belly. Third, ancient people used natural dead air chambers. Inside a cave, they would build a low-lying bed platform of branches and leaves, then pile dry moss and animal hide on top. The air trapped between the ground and the platform stayed relatively still, acting like a primitive sleeping bag. Today's sleeping bags employ similar dead air chambers, but they are engineered with synthetic fibers that maintain loft even when damp. The lesson here is that keeping the insulating material dry is as vital as the material itself. Fourth, the Ice Age hunter did not just wrap himself. He also wrapped his tools. Stone points were stored in leather pouches lined with fur, which prevented the cold from seeping into his hands when he reached for a spear. Modern climbers still use insulated glove liners and fur-lined pockets for electronics, a direct nod to that age-old habit. Finally, there is a cultural lesson. Ancient peoples understood that insulation is not a one-size-fits-all solution. They adapted their clothing to the season, the activity, and even the individual's body shape. A taller, lean hunter might layer more fur on the limbs, while a shorter, stocky gatherer relied on a thicker torso wrap. Modern gear companies now offer modular systems, allowing users to add or remove layers on the fly, a design philosophy that echoes the flexible, personalized approach of Ice Age survivalists. So the next time you zip up a high-tech jacket or settle into a synthetic sleeping bag, remember that you stand on the shoulders of people who, through trial, error, and countless frozen nights, learned how to coax heat out of the very air around them. Their simple, effective tricks are the foundation of the sophisticated insulation technologies we take for granted today.